with that, let us move into the discussion itself. The title of today's webinar, From Forest to Cup, reflects the idea that coffee production is deeply connected to the landscapes in which it's grown. And increasingly, the future of coffee depends not only what ends up in the cup when we drink our morning coffee, but also on the health and resilience of the landscapes where coffee is produced. And we all know that coffee landscapes around the world are under increasing pressure. For example, in Brazil's Atlantic forest region, farmers are already experiencing the impacts of climate change, soil degradation, and biodiversity loss, while also facing growing economic uncertainty and, of course, production risks, not only due to climate change, but a lot related to climate change. At the same time, expectations toward the coffee sector are changing rapidly. We see increasing demand for production systems that are not only producing good quality coffee, but also climate resilient, traceable, and environmentally sustainable. And one approach that is increasing attention in this context is agroforestry. In simple terms, this means integrating trees and ecological diversity, different types of plants, vegetables back into agricultural systems. And in that way, we aim to improve soil health, strengthen climate resilience, support biodiversity, but also to diversify farmer livelihoods. And that means that we move away from monoculture production models toward landscapes where coffee is grown alongside different tree species and other forms of vegetation. Now, today's discussion is grounded in an early stage project in Brazil, where farmers have recently registered with the intention to transition toward agroforestry systems in both coffee production and pasture landscapes. So rather than presenting a finished success story, today's conversation is really about exploring what these transitions require in practice, from farmer engagement and biodiversity considerations to financing and long-term scalability. And to unpack these different dimensions, I'm very happy to welcome our speakers today. Beatrice Borth, Senior Program Officer at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Happy to have you on board. Christina Singh, COO and co-founder of Grow Grounds, a Danish company that partners with farmers, companies, and investors to support regenerative coffee systems. And Franciele Lasmar Balduino, she's co-country manager at HRNS do Brasil. And we are happy to have all three of us with me today. So I think this sets the stage very nicely for our discussion today. And I would like to start with you, Beatrice. From your perspective, why is it urgent to transform coffee and agricultural landscapes today? And what role do nature-based solutions and biodiversity play in this transition?
Thank you, Katharina. Thanks, everyone. And good afternoon, good morning, depending when you're joining us. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. To start answering the question, I want to invite us to think about a coffee farm, right? A few decades ago, it may have been a diverse landscape with trees providing shades, birds and insects, sustaining natural process and rich soils. But today, what we see in many places that the same landscapes look very different, right? More exposed, more simplified, more vulnerable. The rains don't come when they have to, or they come all at once. It's everything unpredictable. And for the farmer standing on that landscape, the question is no longer just how to produce more. It's how to continue producing it at all. So in many regions, this is no longer future risks. It's a present reality. And without change, some of the systems may simply become non-viable for the next two generations. And this is in many ways why we're here today, right? The agricultural landscapes are under pressure, as Katharina mentioned, in multiple directions. Climate change is reshaping growing conditions, bringing more frequent and intense shocks. And at the same time, biodiversity, the very foundation that makes this system function, is declining at an unprecedented rate. And these are not two separate crises. They are deeply interconnected. So we see the concepts very clearly. declining productivity, increased costs, growing uncertainty. And those that are most effective are also those that have least capacity to adapt. Smallholder farmers and rural communities who deeply depend on these landscapes for their livelihoods. We also acknowledge that the way that many agricultural systems has been designed in the past contributed to this situation, right? We have often seen that they prioritize short-term productivity without fully accounting for environmental and social costs and potential harms that they would do, costs that are now more visible and increasingly difficult to ignore. So when we talk about transforming agricultural landscape, we're not talking about marginal improvements. We are talking about a fundamental shift, one that is urgently needed to ensure that these systems remain viable, resilient, and productive over time. So what does this shift look in practice? Let's go back to that coffee landscape. Transformation means moving away from simplified extractive systems towards systems that are more diverse, more resilient, and better aligned with ecological process. It means redesigning production systems so they deliver multiple functions, from stabilizing microclimates to improving soil fertility, diversifying incomes, and of course, reducing long-term risks for farmers. And this is where nature-based solutions become so powerful, because they allow us to address multiple challenges at once: climate adaptation, carbon sequestration, ecosystem restoration, and livelihoods. In other words, we are not just improving the system, we are restoring the functions that make the system work. But nature-based solutions are not a silver bullet. They are often presented as simply win-win approaches, but in reality, the outcomes depend entirely on how they are designed and implemented. If we focus only on carbon, for example, we risk creating systems that perform very well in terms of emissions, but deliver little on biodiversity or even undermine it. This is where the conversation is to shift, because biodiversity is not a co-benefit that we add on the top. It is the foundation. It is what maintains soil fertility, regulates water, and supports pollination. Without it, agricultural systems become increasingly dependent on external inputs. So integrating biodiversity is not optional. It is essential for making these systems sustainable over time. But if we know what needs to be done, then the question is, what does it take to actually make it work? From our experience at the World Innovation Facility, we work at the level, not on the level of the theory, but a level of implementation. For us, impact does not come from good intentions alone. It requires the right conditions. First, we need clear standards and frameworks so that the projects are designed with balanced objectives from the beginning. Second, we need strong safeguards and governance to ensure that environmental and social safeguards integrity are respected, and of course to manage the trade-offs effectively along the way. And third, robust monitoring systems so that we can track what is happening on the ground and adapt if needed. Because ultimately, what matters is not what we intend to do, is what we can actually achieve and how we demonstrate that. And this is becoming increasingly important not only for impact, but for credibility. Investors, partners, markets, they are all asking the same question. Are these solutions delivering real and measurable outcomes? So to end, I would like us to come back to the bigger picture. Transforming agricultural landscape is not something that individual farmers or even individual projects can achieve alone. It requires enabling systems, policies that create the right incentives, finance that supports long-term investments, markets that reward sustainability, and a strong connection between all of these elements. We are seeing progress in this direction, for sure, but the pace of change still needs to accelerate significantly. So perhaps the question for today is not whether we do need to transform the agricultural landscape. We really do. The real question is more, how do we do this in a way that truly aligns climate, biodiversity, and livelihoods? And how do we move from promising examples on the ground to systems that can deliver impact at the scale that we need? I will leave for now that. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, for setting the scene. And I guess we all completely agree that the enabling conditions and the whole landscape approach is very important to make this work and fly. But the work needs to start somewhere, right? So let's make it a bit more concrete and look at the farmer perspective. So I would like to invite Fran Maybe you can tell us a little bit from your experience with the engagement with farmers so far. So what motivates people to join this transition? What are the concerns or uncertainty that are being expressed, and how do you reach the farmers?
Thank you, Katarina. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So first of all, I think it's really important to briefly contextualize about our project here in Brazil. So the project operates in the Serra do Papagaio region, which is considered a key biodiversity area in Brazil, a priority area for biodiversity, conservation, and extremely important for water resources, for example, and also ecological connectivity in a region that is called Mantiqueira de Minas, in Minas Gerais. So we are talking about a territory where agricultural production, not just coffee, but also pasture, as Catarina mentioned before, coexists directly with ecosystems of high environmental value. So because of that, the challenge is to build production models that connect conservation with income generation for farmers. Within this context, the project seeks to promote the transition to regenerative systems focused on agroforestry, integrating three main components. The first one is livelihoods, meaning income generation and economic security for farmers and their families, biodiversity, promoting ecological restoration and increasing environmental resilience, and the last one, carbon, contributing also to climate mitigation and access to new financial mechanisms for the producers. So talking about farmer registration and engagement process that we are facing now here in Brazil. So far, we have registered 149 farmers distributed across 10 different municipalities in the Mantiqueira de Minas region. And based on the registration process and the conversations that we have had with farmers so far, we can clearly see a strong interest in agroforest systems, mainly for pasture and also coffee. And this interest is closely connected to the main challenge they face today. First one, climate change, no doubt. Farmers, they are reporting to us increasing temperatures, irregular rainfall patterns, more frequent extreme weather events, difficulties in maintaining productivity, direct impacts on coffee quality, and also a growing risk of firing in the region. In some remote areas that we are working with, access is so difficult that even firefighting teams face challenge reaching the affected areas. Because of these, many farmers, they are also interested in implementing systems that can help protect the productive areas and reduce fire risks through increased vegetation cover, better soil moisture retention, and also more resilient landscapes. So what we see also, because we have the motivations, and we also have some challenges and some barriers with the producers. What we see, despite the strong interest in regenerative agroforest systems, farmers, they still face some important implementation challenges. In many cases, undocumented or informal land tenure limits access to financial mechanisms, contracts, especially related to carbon. The second one, I would like to mention, rural succession is also really important. As many young people, they are leaving the countryside, and older farmers are uncertain about investing in long-term transitions without knowing who will continue managing the farms in the future. In some of the municipalities that we are working with, they are still resistant to adopting a new production approach. This is also something common here in Brazil, especially where traditional practices have been used for generations. So at the same time, one really important thing that I would like to mention is farmer-to-farmer influence. It is critical, since positive experiences from early adopters often motivate other producers to engage as well. In addition, We have also concerns regarding carbon contracts, for example, because it's a bit formal for them. It's a long-term commitment, and sometimes it's really important for us to think about these contracts and reinforce the importance of transparency, trust building, and adapting solutions to the local reality. To finish my speech here, what we learned about this implementation in practice until now. One very important lesson for us is that this transition does not happen only through technical assistance or seedling distribution. It requires trust building, continuous support for the producers and the families, local adaptation, and also especially a co-creation with the farmers here in Brazil and also in other regions. It's really important to keep the farmers together with us, building the solutions for the future.
Thank you, Fran, for these insights on the project. And it already sounds like a bit challenging and many concerns that need to be addressed and raised. And one of them you already mentioned is, of course, the economic and financing perspective. And I would like to hand over to Christina now. From your perspective, what makes this landscape transition economically viable, and what is maybe often still missing in early stage projects, like the questions that farmers are raising about a succession, for example? What can we do about it, or how do you approach this?
Yeah, thanks so much, Katharina, and also Beatrice and Fran for bringing these very important points forward. Now, let me just close with a third perspective, or not close, but add on. So we heard from Beatrice, landscapes have changed. Farmers are locked in. Actually, they need to prioritize short-term yields over maybe long-term sustainability or feasibility goals. I mean, this goes hand in hand with the rural exodus that Fran was mentioning. And when you ask me, because I have a different pair of glasses on than Fran and than Beatrice, but when you ask me what motivates farmers, it is the money. It's not only it has to be a business case. Katharina and I worked very extensively on the farmer business case in the feasibility study to this project. And there we could see, okay, what are the competing land uses? I come into this in a second, but I want to start off with the recognition that farmers are actually stakeholders here and part of the solution. And from another project that is actually a bit further advanced, where we did the first farmer payments, the cooperative we work with, she was like the head of sustainability, was like, Christina, you know how many project implementers come to us distributing seedlings thinking that that job is done. Now the farmers let them go plant. It's 5% planting a tree. It's 95% managing that tree. And that's why carbon is such an important key to unlocking long-term finance for the farmers, actually. We pay back between 65 and 80% of the carbon payments to the farmer, depending on the projects where we are and the implementation structure. And now that insetting project that we have together with the Roaster Löfbergs, the cooperatives Cochupé and Expo Caser in Brazil, just to give you two quotes from farmers that receive payments. One farmer said, "When you told us you wanted to pay us for planting trees, I said, my God in heaven, to be recognized by people outside, and on top of that, add financial value to our product, that's a reward. For me, this is prosperity and abundance." Obviously, this farmer is an early mover, but she's also a really important figure in her local community, and this has really caused a lot of interest, her testimony. Yeah. Then the other farmer is of the older generation, and she said, "Look, at this moment, the payment was symbolic because I was able to tell future generations, my children and grandchildren, look, grandma is selling carbon credits. Look, how modern am I?" So to give you just a bit of a on-the-ground perspective to start with.
Nice, thank you so much. I already see that questions are popping in the Q&A, and there's one question about the total land size for this project. So maybe just to give an idea of the size, Fran, can you just mention like what are we aiming at with this project?
Sure. So our goal is to achieve at least 500 hectares in total in the area. And we have different sizes for each producer. What we are trying to stick right now is 5 hectares per producer. And we have until now 149 producers. And taking this quantity of 5 hectares per producer, at least, in maximum, sorry, we have more than 300 already hectares registered for conversion.
Let's put things a little bit into perspective, and it also gives an idea of the scale of the project, and maybe we can come back to Beatrice. So we have the landscape vision, we have the reality on the ground, and we also have the economic reality. From your perspective, if we want to scale, how can we do that and not compromise biodiversity integrity? Because this is one of the goals that IUCN has in its constitution, right? So where does this part come in? We haven't talked about too much about this yet.
Yeah, that's actually a critical question, right? Because for us at IUCN, the success of these nature-based solutions that we talk about, it's more how we ensure that they are credible and they are high integrity. So integrity is very important, is at the core of nature conservation for us. So for what we can see with the project in Brazil under the innovation facility and also our other flagship projects, there are, I would say, 3 elements that are particularly important in putting in assuring that approaches are credible and integrity. So first one is placing biodiversity at the center. So as I said at the beginning, it cannot be just a co-benefit, something that we add on the side. It has to be the foundation. So if these approaches need to restore the functions of the system, they need to focus on the functions of the biodiversity to the agricultural systems, right? So otherwise we risk with short-term gains, but the long-term resilience of the landscapes are not secured. So for us at the innovation facility, the credibility starts with the design. So we have to ensure that the biodiversity outcomes are embedded from the start on project design and not treated as secondary. So this is also a reflection of all the global policy frameworks, the Global Commit Montreal framework, that emphasize that climate and biodiversity objectives, they have to be addressed together because, as we said, they are combined crises. And second, there is also the important role of standards, safeguards, and environmental integrity as a whole. So if we want these approaches to be effective and to be trusted by the local farmers, the investors, and the markets, we need to define what good looks like. So for us, it means having a clear standard to define what we expect with these projects on terms of biodiversity, on climate, on livelihoods, the safeguards to ensure that the carbon projects, the complex carbon projects, do not create unintended environmental or social harm for the farmers and for the local conditions, and of course robust monitoring systems so we can track the performance over time of these projects and also manage any trade-off that might occur on the way. And without these elements, it's really there is a risk of fragmentation, so that they deliver uneven results. So very good carbon projects that do not deliver biodiversity is not interested anymore. They have to deliver on both, and of course on livelihoods for sure. And last point is there has to be enabled conditions for scaling. You mentioned scaling on the question, and this is very important because we see on the past that even very well-designed projects, they struggle to scale because the system does not support them. So from what we see at the innovation facility, for these activities and these approaches to scale, we need coherent policy frameworks that make sure to align agriculture, biodiversity, climate objectives in a holistic approach. We need access to finance, of course, because as Christina said, it's very important that we have a business case, particularly if we talk about a long-term of a carbon project, right? And private sector needs to be aware of the risks and the opportunities to invest in these projects. And of course, institutional capacity. We have here on the call 2 organizations that are very capable of implementing strong projects, and we need more of that. We need more of these organizations to support implementation, monitoring, and learning throughout the life cycle of the carbon credit and of carbon projects for sure. And last point, and I close, I think that is very important also to link biodiversity, climate finance, and development outcomes, because this creates credibility and also opportunity to scale. And this is also very much in line with what we have seen on the international forums, COPs, and CDBD COP as well. So this is just to summarize. So credibility and sustainability and scalability, they come from making sure that biodiversity is central, that we have these strong standards in place, and of course that the system enables the long-term implementation. I'll stop there. Thank you.
And I come right in actually, Beatrice, because I find it so, one of the big motivations for us Growgrounds to go into this project was actually the biodiversity expertise and the access to methodologies and tools that we have through IUCN and that are now implemented with a local HRNS local team. But we also jointly encountered this huge challenge that now that we're on the other side of it, I think we can smile and be happy, but we are actually the only project in the innovation facility that works with productive landscapes. So then to define that is adjacent to a key biodiversity hotspot, to a state national park. So then to define what is close enough for us to deliver a biodiversity impact. Well, okay, that's one thing. We can work with farmers that are closer to the national park, but talking about scalability, finding a market for these products. Good luck finding then roasters that source from these exact farms on the 5-kilometer proximity to the park. So there has been a bit of I would say, a lot of discussions here actually between the 4 of us. And now I think we reached at a point where we are having a solution that is both beneficial for biodiversity, it works in productive landscape, and it is actually investable for coffee roasters and other potential customers.
Let's stick to biodiversity just for a little while. Fran, how does that resonate with farmers? Are they actually interested in biodiversity? Do they know what it's about? And how is that then implemented in practice, right? So we talked a lot about planting designs, for example. Does that the biodiversity part play a role there? How do you see that on the ground?
A really interesting question, Catarina. When Beatriz was talking, I was thinking how it changed during the years, in the last years here in Brazil. If we spoke to producers 5-10 years ago, it was really difficult to have a nice answer from the majority of the producers about biodiversity and soil conservation and things like that. But now they really see as important aspects for coffee production and agriculture in general as well. So it's really interesting to talk to them and to see that they value these and they understand that they need also to restore the areas, the native areas, to continue producing in the future. So this is one of the main motivations for them to start the project together with us, because they understand they need to think about different production systems to continue this in the future. So it is something really important for them. And when we explain about the approach for agroforestry, it's really interesting to see that they understand already the positive impacts that they are going to see in the systems, not in the future, but also in the present, because they are going to start and they are going to start seeing the first results in the first years.
Yeah. I think it's always very beautiful when you talk to smallholder farmers on the ground, when they report, I don't know, they changed some practices and now they're seeing birds again on their plants. It's super nice. And one other observation that I got from the field is that often when talking to female producers, they have even a stronger commitment to the environment and preserving like the environment for future generations. So I think that's also an aspect that is interesting, the inclusion of women, of youth, and maybe other minority groups. So that's always interesting and also brings in a different perspective. From the questions that I'm seeing in the chat and also from the conversations that I had in the field, the economic question in the end is the one that decides. So farmers, of course, they run a business, right? So they won't do any transformation if it's not economically viable. And this is a very important aspect, and also what I perceive as some of the reluctance that we see in the field. So, well, if I don't know, plant a tree instead of a coffee tree, how will my yield evolve? This is one of the questions. And then the other question is also, do carbon payments actually play a role in farmers' income? Is that realistic, or do we need to create a business case actually without the income from carbon credits? I would leave that question maybe to all three of you. I don't know who want to come in first, but this economic viability, I think it's essential to see the real transformation.
Should I maybe start and then, yeah. So again, like now we are in a region, you can see it in my background, it's very hilly. You have a bit of a mosaic landscape and farmers are doing livestock and coffee, often both on separate plots of land. But for example, another region that is just on the border, on the edge of 1,000 meters above sea level, where often they lose a lot of their harvest increasingly over the years due to frost on those a bit lower areas. And there, if you farmers drop out of producing coffee in those areas and lease them for soy. So they lease them to someone else. They allow someone else on their land. They get 340 euros per hectare there. So that means if we compete with carbon already on this, then we can keep the coffee in production and they get the coffee yields on top of their carbon yields, which is obviously much more significant, but still. So for those frost areas, we have a design that is denser. So we have 240 trees per hectare, and roughly this would yield 400 to 500 euros. So already with a carbon price of 40 euros per ton of CO2, we keep those areas under production and have a positive business case for the farmer. That is obviously not for this hilly, moist, more altitude region. It's just another example from a project that we have in the very semi-arid dry Cerrado. So I think, Katharina, the carbon is part of the solution. I wouldn't leave it out, honestly. I think we have the tool. I'm an environmental economist by nature. You can criticize the carbon market as much as you want, but show me an alternative. This is the only system globally that actually pays for environmental action. With carbon as a commodity, the methods, the monitoring have been really improved and really adapted to nature-based solutions. So it's this system I'm kind of betting on at this point. Not even betting, I'm founding my company on this. But obviously there's other parts. There is the reduce hopefully the quality top up that you get as a farmer or the marketing top up, even if you can sell this through the cooperative as a forest agroforestry coffee. There's an evolving market in Europe at least. There is some type of timber, if that is also in the tree selection. After the permanence period, after the project end, for retirement purposes, maybe. And I forgot now one. The reduction fertilizers. Because we do actually in Brazil, there's so much amazing research by EPAMIC on natural pest and disease control. And we do incorporate those species in our planting designs. And that means that farmers actually attract the natural enemies of the coffee plagues. So they need to put less pesticides. Did I say fertilizers? I mean pesticides. Yeah.
Fertilizers
Yeah.
as well, right? Depending on what kind of plants you plant, they also give a lot of nutrition and keep nutrition in the ground, right? So definitely. Do we want to hear from Beatrice first? So maybe one aspect is here, you mentioned, well, as of now, the carbon market is the only one that is working, but I already see in the chat there's, on the one hand side, skepticism, how well this is actually working, and on the other hand side, the idea of generating other markets for nature-based solutions, right? And I know that Beatrice, you're also working on these kind of advancements.
Yeah, I like that Christina already raised the flag that we wanted to raise. So that's great. Thanks, Christina, for that, for the opening points. But yeah, I think I agree with Christina on her point that carbon markets do offer a solution. Of course, they are not the only solution we see on the market. There are multiple ways to conserve nature, to preserve nature, and to track finance for nature. But Vault, actually, the innovation facility was built on this challenge and this criticism about the carbon market. So we learned from this experience, from the bad experience in the market, and we said, okay, IUCN, KfW, BMZ, we want to do something different than what is there. We want to raise the bar of the ambition of these projects. These projects are very on a low level, and we need to put a higher bar of ambition for all of this. So what we do is that we provide an early stage funding for these projects, and the idea is to de-risk the initiatives, so that to make sure that the risks to implement high quality nature-based projects is low. And this will allow, so this initial grants will allow to be ready for the market and also to attract further private investments because of this de-risk initiative. So our projects are designed to deliver not only on carbon, because this idea of an old carbon market that only delivers carbon, it doesn't help anymore the conditions of the local communities. So we do need to have new revenue streams for the communities and benefits in the long term. You mentioned, Katarina, gender and youth. This is also a very important part of the projects. And this will need to be on a holistic approach that includes biodiversity, livelihoods, and the carbon. So, and the question, will the carbon farmers have to pay a loan for this? No, they don't, because the idea is that the grants, it's a start for the project. The carbon credits will generate a part of the return on investment, but of course there are a combination of different enabling instruments, from public funding, from private capital mobilization, and of course for the whole value chain engagement. So the coffee sector that is also interested in changing their supply chains, in greening their supply chains, are also welcome to join and to make this project stronger. So that would be my contribution to that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I think for long-term scalability, probably we cannot build only on grants for buying the seedlings, for example, or covering the costs of planting, but at least to kickstart the development, that's definitely helping. Fran, maybe you want to comment as well, and I would also like to point into one direction. So from the poll results, there was one of the bottlenecks which received little attention, with 14% building local technical capacities. But I think it's actually an essential thing. So maybe you can also comment on that.
Sure, Katarina. To close this discussion, it's really important to explain to you how we are treating this carbon aspect here on the field. So what we are doing is discussing with the producers first about biodiversity, discussing about a design that is going to keep the productivity in a high perspective for them, also trying to increase quality of the products. We also discuss about diversification, so they can also have some extra income from other production systems together with coffee and pasture. And then we treat carbon as an extra for them, because it's going to be an extra amount of money that they're going to have in the end. So extra income but we don't consider these as the main reason to start the project with us. So they understand all the other aspects before. And what you mentioned about the capacity inside of the region, it's really, really important. They really need to be part of the decisions of the design building together with the experts, the consultants, and also our team. And they also need to understand how to deal with these new systems, because they are going to be in the day-by-day activities. So it's really important to have people inside of the region that understand, and then they can also continue the systems, and then we are going to gain a scalability in this type of projects.
And there's one question from the chat, which is actually about higher quality coffee yielding a cup premium and the financial loss from lower yields. And I think this is one of the essential debates that we have when we implement agroforestry systems. One is about, well, does yield actually decrease or not? And the studies that are out there, they show very different results, depending very much on the system where you're in. In Brazil, we have already a very highly productive system, so it's actually quite difficult to increase yields there. While we work, for example, also in Tanzania with agroforestry, there the potential to increase yields is very high. So even with planting more dense systems with trees, you might see an increase in yield. So I think that's an interesting point. Fran, is there something that you can already see? Did we calculate a business case yet with such a cup premium and maybe lower yields? What is your take on that?
No, what we are seeing for this project specifically is that we are designing a system that seeks at least the same yield that we have right now. So our perspective is not to decrease these, because as you mentioned before, it's really important, the economic aspect for the producers, because it's their business. So it's really important to keep these as it is. So what we are doing is creating designs that is not going to interfere in decreasing the yields. But instead of these, as you mentioned as well, that is difficult to make it better. We can see some producers that achieve better results than others. But it's mainly connected to how they produce and how they dedicate to the production systems. So when we have small areas, it's really easy for them to deal with it. But we are trying to focus more on quality, how we can increase quality so they can achieve better results, achieve different markets, and then in the end, they are going to achieve also a better income.
Thanks. There are a lot of different themes in the chat. There are two questions which I would still like to raise. One is for Christina about the actual markets of carbon. Like, what marketplaces does GrowGround use for storing and retiring and transferring of carbon credits? So how does it work in practice?
Yeah, so GrowGrounds is working currently under the Gold Standard certification. So the Gold Standard gives us the registry for our carbon units, where we have them issued. And we do target exclusively at this point the voluntary carbon market, especially in Brazil, because Brazil at this point doesn't have an Article 6 setup in place, which is also one of the things that came up in this project and is very interesting to have more stakeholder views on, actually. So yeah, this is the carbon credit side of things. Then actually in January, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol published the Scope 3 standard, and it's going into it will be valid from next January. This is actually not for carbon credits in this sense. It's more for like Scope 3 removal. So we are getting ready to offering products that are, instead of carbon credits, actually Scope 3 removals. a bit of a technical difference for the use case. Yeah, but these are kind of the venues we see right now. But we in our projects in Kenya and Uganda, we are flirting with Article 6 and building the capacity internally, and also getting this, like, it's almost like a little certification on top of the certification to be able to trade under this compliance scheme.
Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, the people who are following this market, I think there's so much development still going on, and many actors trying to find their way through the market, and also having smallholders benefit from the carbon market, right? Because this is something where coffee is produced mainly by smallholder farmers. So how can they actually benefit from it? I think it's a super interesting question, and if we come to good solutions, that would really help the transition. One last question to Beatrice, also from the Q&A. How do you see the potential of biodiversity credits? So we know that there is development in the EU currently. What's your impression?
That is, I think that's the €1,000,000 question, right? I'll try to answer very briefly, but of course, based also reflecting a bit on what we discussed today. So for us at AUCN, the biodiversity credits, they do have a real potential, but they need to have, as we said before, it has to have high integrity from the start. So they can be a tool that create incentives for action, and also that help us close this massive financing gap that we have for nature. But they need to be used very carefully and very science-driven. So for us, they have to be built around strong metrics and robust monitoring. And here I'd like to mention one of our tools. Christina and Fran mentioned that we do have a lot of tools that we share with our grantees at IUCN. And one of these very nice tools is the RHINO approach, which RHINO stands for Rapid, High Integrity, Nature Positive Outcomes. And the RHINO approach is very important on the biodiversity credits discussion, because it helps us to translate biodiversity outcomes into something more measurable and high integrity. So funded on a framework, and this framework helps us also where to act, what we have to do, and how to track this impact. So the World Innovation Facility projects, they are encouraged to use the RHINO approach and also the STAR metrics. Both Christina and Fran can confirm that, the importance to have the STAR metric to translate the data that we have into more tangible priorities and to a more tailored model for Brazil and for the project. But this is for us the center of any discussion on the biodiversity. So biodiversity credits. So they are very important as part of the solution to the future, but we need to be very careful with the foundations, if the pillars are well established. Otherwise, we tend to repeat the challenges that we already seen on the carbon markets.
Yeah, thank you so much also for mentioning the impact measurement part, because we didn't touch too much upon this today. But of course, it's a challenge and very important to document what's actually happening on the ground, especially if you want to certify the nature services in the end that are provided through this transition. And before we come to the end, I would just like to have a final round with all three of you to give advice to maybe the people in the audience today. And so what would be the one thing you would encourage organizations, practitioners, or partners to keep in mind when working on regenerative transitions like this? Christina, what would it be?
Yes, I'm unmuted. I think building business cases around regenerative agriculture. Carbon is one, biodiversity is another. I'm drinking lemonade from the coffee cherry, which is a new startup in Denmark here. Tastes similar to Club Mate. It's another idea. Imagine coffee farmers could, on a larger scale, actually also sell their coffee cherry pulp. That's kind of, what I believe in. And when doing the design, staying farmer focused, you can't force farmers to change their production system. That's their bread and butter. Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Fran, what about you?
Okay, so from my perspective here in the field is put farmers at the center of the decisions and the process. It's always really nice and really important. So we need to respect their knowledge, what they understand about the reality and the territory. So it's really important because the farmers, they are not only beneficiaries inside of the transition, they are the key actors making it possible. So it's really important to have this in mind to start in a very good way with these transitions.
Great, thank you. Beatrice, we come maybe back to the system level. I don't know, what would be your advice?
Yeah, I think the system level is missing here on the equation, so I'm happy to add. Yeah, if I had to pick one thing, I think it would be invest time and resources to have strong safeguard systems in place, because it's not going to be visible as the nice trees and the work of the farmers, but is a very important foundation that will give the project credibility, will attract investors, and will de-risk the implementation moving forward.
Thank you so much. Well, we are almost at the end. What I take away from today's discussion is, again, I would say that the regenerative transitions are not only about planting trees, of course. They are basically about aligning very different realities. We have the farmer level where the farmer takes the decision to implement the system. We need long-term financing and enabling market conditions. We need the biodiversity integrity. Otherwise, the whole effort doesn't really pay off for nature, right? And we need the landscape level transformation, and we need the scaling. So I guess today's discussion showed again that these transitions do need a long breath, as we say in German, and they start long before implementation. So we need trust, we need partnerships, and we need the willingness to navigate uncertainty together. So with that, I would like to close today's webinar. Big thank you to Beatrice, Christina, and Fran for bringing these complementary perspectives from biodiversity and system thinking to finance and carbon markets, and to the realities and motivations of farmers on the ground. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate your engagement and interest in this topic. And I wish you a lovely day ahead. And hopefully we'll see great landscapes transformations in the future. Bye-bye.